It was a Sunday morning like any other, and Eduardo was getting ready to go to church with his family. He dressed carefully, adjusted his tie in the mirror, and smiled with satisfaction upon seeing his wife and children ready for another service. To everyone around him, Eduardo was a model of faith, a respected deacon, a faithful tithe-giver, always ready to help with church events. But that day, something was different. During the sermon, the pastor read Matthew 7:21-23, and those words seemed to cut through Eduardo's soul like a sharp blade. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." His chest tightened. He knew that verse well, having heard it many times before. Yet for some reason, in that moment, the feeling was entirely different. A deep unease began to spread inside him, as if an inconvenient truth was about to surface. Eduardo tried to push the thought away and concentrate on the rest of the sermon, but his restlessness only grew. What if he were among those who merely deluded themselves about their own salvation? He did everything right, followed the traditions, was always present at services. But what about his heart? The brutal truth was that, far from the eyes of the church, Eduardo was a different man. His faith, although impeccable on the outside, was nothing more than an empty shell. He knew that his thoughts were far from God most of the time, that his patience wore thin easily at home, that his prayers were mechanical and lifeless, yet he had never stopped to reflect on that, until now. With each word the pastor uttered, Eduardo felt the weight of a truth he had always ignored. "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name?' And then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you.'" Those words echoed in his mind like a verdict. For the first time he asked himself, what if I am among those many? He felt a lump in his throat. His Christian life had always been about appearances, maintaining a reputation, doing what was expected. But did God truly know him? Was his faith genuine or merely a well-rehearsed role? The feeling of discomfort grew, and he realized he had never felt so exposed before God. At the end of the service, Eduardo hurried out, avoiding conversation. In the car, his wife talked about the plans for the afternoon, but he barely listened. His mind was trapped on the question that would not let him go. What does it really mean to know God? While driving, he remembered how years ago his faith had been alive. He longed to be in God's presence, felt joy in praying, and sought the Word with a burning thirst. But over time, everything became automatic. He still did the same things, but without passion, without sincerity. He was a Christian who knew all the right answers, but whose heart was distant. What if religion had become nothing more than a disguise? Traffic moved slowly, but Eduardo hardly noticed. His mind was immersed in memories that now seemed so distant. He recalled the first time he truly felt God's presence, years ago, during a spiritual retreat. How real that had felt. A fire burned in his chest, and he sensed that his life would never be the same again. But now everything was different. He still spoke about God, but did he speak with God? He still sang hymns, but did he truly worship? The shock of his own spiritual coldness hit him like a punch in the stomach. He realized that his Christian life had become a performance, and he was merely a well-trained actor. When he arrived home, he went straight to his room and closed the door. He sat on the bed, holding his face in his hands. The silence around him contrasted with the turmoil inside. For the first time in years, Eduardo felt fear. Fear of being lost, fear of hearing from Jesus the terrible words, "I never knew you." Fear of discovering that everything he had built, his reputation, his position in the church, his status as a man of God, was a lie. But what hurt the most was realizing that he had deceived himself. It was never intentional, never a premeditated plan. It just happened. Life became hectic, responsibilities grew, and little by little his genuine faith was being replaced by an empty ritual. Eduardo felt a tightness in his chest. It was not just a passing discomfort. It was a real weight, a call to awaken. He had always believed he was an authentic Christian, but at that moment he realized he spent more time trying to appear saved than truly seeking God. His Christianity was reduced to commitments, meetings, and an impeccable routine within the church. But where was his heart? Where was the genuine love for Christ? He felt like a modern Pharisee, zealous for traditions, yet distant from the living God. The thought struck him like a thunderbolt. What if my life ended today? He knew all the verses, was well versed in doctrines, but the question that burned in his soul was simple. Would God recognize me as his? Suddenly, Eduardo fell to his knees on the floor. It wasn't something planned. It just happened. A stifled cry escaped his throat, and the words came before he could think. Lord, forgive me. It was a raw outcry, unpracticed, without masks. For the first time in a long while, he was not praying to be seen, nor to maintain an image of piety. He was praying because his soul was screaming, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to deceive myself. Show me, Lord, what it really means to know you. The floor beneath his knees was cold, but his heart was beginning to burn once more. And there, in that room, Eduardo realized that there was something worse than not knowing God, thinking you know him, only to discover too late that you never truly knew him. That moment on the floor of the room was unlike any prayer Eduardo had ever made. There were no fancy phrases, no formality, just a broken man before God, aware of his own weakness. He did not ask for blessings, did not ask for deliverance, asked for nothing more than one thing, real change. And for the first time he felt something different. It wasn't a fleeting emotion or a mere shiver. It was a deep conviction that God was there, listening to every word. He realized that salvation was not about doing things for God, but about being his. It was more than having biblical knowledge, more than attending church, more than maintaining a good reputation. It was about surrender, dependence, and true transformation. When he stood up, Eduardo felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but he knew that that moment couldn't just remain there. If all that had happened was real, it had to reflect in his life. It wasn't enough to have just an emotional repentance. It was necessary to bear fruit. The true Christian is not the one who merely talks about God, but the one who lives for him. And Eduardo decided that from that moment on, he no longer wanted just to appear as a Christian. He wanted to truly know God, obey him with all his heart, and live a genuine faith, because in the end, nothing matters more than hearing, on that great day, the words every child of God longs to hear. Well done, good and faithful servant. That night, Eduardo lay in bed feeling different. It wasn't a superficial change, nor was it merely the emotion of a single moment. It was something deeper, something he knew would extend beyond that day. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to impress the church, nor did he need to fit a certain mold. He just wanted to be true before God. The faith he thought he possessed was nothing more than a comfortable illusion, but now he understood that God did not want a Christianity of appearances. He wanted a surrendered heart. And Eduardo decided that from now on, his life would no longer be built on religious vanity, but on a real relationship with the Creator. The following days were different. For the first time, Eduardo realized that reading the Bible wasn't a duty, but a pleasure, that praying wasn't a ritual, but a living dialogue, that serving in the church wasn't an obligation, but a natural response to the love he had rediscovered. He did not become perfect, nor did he expect to be, but now there was a certainty within him. His faith was no longer based on tradition, habit, or the fear of judgment by others. Now, he was not just talking about God, he was living for him. And, for the first time in years, Eduardo felt at peace, because deep down, nothing matters more than, on the final day, Jesus being able to look into your eyes and say, I know you.